As was the nature of such things, there were no favorites. It didn't matter what you had done in life, whether you had been rich, poor, good, bad, everyone was treated much the same. However, it was generally agreed that those who had left the world too soon, and thus hadn't gotten to experience the fullness of life to adulthood, should be given certain privileges. One such privilege was the opportunity to return, for one day, on a milestone birthday, to see the world and their loved ones again. The only stipulation was that they couldn't reveal themselves. Not that they weren't allowed to, but even if they stood in front of a childhood friend or a family member and talked to them for hours, they would never be recognized. The boy had been 10 when the lifelong illness had finally took him. He'd never known life beyond 10, nor had he known life without illness. Yet, on his 21st birthday, he awoke, a healthy adult. He studied his reflection in the mirror for some time. The face was familiar, yet not. He could pick out certain elements he recognized, the eyes, the smile, the cowlick in the back, but he had sometimes wondered what he would look like as a grown-up who had never known illness, and it was difficult to reconcile this face with the face he remembered. The world was also familiar, but not. It had changed, but not so much that he couldn't navigate it. The real challenge was acting independently. He had always been dependent on someone during his life, both because of his youth and also because of his illness. Fortunately, as he wasn't really alive, just visiting, there wasn't much at stake. He could visit anyone he wanted, he had only to think of them. He had already decided to save those closest to him, his mother, father, and brother, for last. He would visit the rest of his family first, the cousins, aunts, and uncles he'd seen every Christmas, Thanksgiving, and summer, at least the ones when he was healthy enough. It was so strange seeing them in the midst of their everyday lives, working their jobs, meeting with people, running errands. He had only ever known them while they were vacationing. He moved through all manner of workplaces, an office in Seattle, a school in Providence, a theater in Minneapolis, a library in Toledo. He wanted to interact with them, but he felt oddly out of place. For them it had been 11 years, and it was clear that they had gone on with their lives. His cousins, most of whom had been in school of one kind or another, were now working adults, and his aunts and uncles were either moving forward in their careers or looking toward retirement. The one interaction he did have with one of them was at a supermarket where one of his cousins was working. Seeing him as another customer, his cousin asked if there was anything he could help him with. "No thanks," the boy replied. "Just looking." As dusk approached, the boy knew he would soon be out of time and would need to visit his closest relatives soon. He visited his grandmother, alone since the death of his grandfather a few years earlier. She sat in her home reading, her eyes staring at the page, but her mind elsewhere. He visited his brother. The once lanky boy who had goofed around and made jokes was now studying to earn his Ph.D. Finally, he visited his parents, sitting together at home, wrapped in each other's arms on the sofa, looking at pictures of the boy from years ago, telling stories and laughing. In the kitchen was a batch of chocolate cupcakes. The boy realized the cupcakes were for him. He began to feel a weight in his chest as he watched his parents remember him. He saw the look in their eyes that he had seen just fleetingly in the eyes of the rest of his family, in moments when they suddenly remembered the date in the midst of another day. It was sadness, of course, but sadness that had healed. Not fully, but enough so that they could remember him with fondness as well, with gratitude for his life and how he had touched them in his short time in the world. Much of what he had seen that day was ordinary, the everyday lives of everyday people, but he was glad for it. Though he had loved them more than anything, and though he had only said 4 words to one of them, he felt that he had never been closer to his family as he was in that moment. They remembered him and missed him, but they had moved on, perhaps better people for having known him, perhaps a better family. The boy felt himself returning from the world, but he kept his eyes on his parents, remembering their son and his too brief existence, and thinking about just how very, very lucky he had been.